Hello, my name is Kevin. I am a First Nations advocate with Dementia Australia. These lands in which we are meeting are many countries filled with languages similar and different. For more than 50,000 years we have come together to trade knowledge, to learn and to teach. Today we join to keep up that tradition. So with that in mind, we now pay our respects to the traditional owners, to elders past and present, to those First Nations people joining us here today.
I met Kellie in Brisbane through a walking football tournament. Kellie had flown over with a couple of her friends, and it wasn't a great venue because the floor was very slippery, and I did my knee. But I found out since then that Kellie had seen me that day and thought, who's this madman throwing himself around?
I'd been playing and he was on the sideline. He had crutches. He'd been injured the day before in the tournament, and I just went up and said hello.
And I said hello.
Thought, this is an interesting guy. We talked a little bit.
And I just was smitten. I just got to get to know it. Didn't even contemplate about her living in Adelaide. I didn't actually know it at that point in time, but even when I did, it just didn't occur to me how that was going to work. I just wanted to get to know her. We just clicked, bonded, and she's such a beautiful person.
A couple of weeks later, I came up to Brisbane to watch the Women's World Cup, and we're at a park, and I asked Anthony about how he got involved with Dementia Australia, and that's when he told me about his diagnosis. And I pretty much thought, holy shit. And I did think about researching it. I went back to Adelaide and we kept talking, and that's when I decided actually I'd rather get to know Anthony than get to know his diagnosis. Just kind of figured that we really liked each other. We had its connection, and just no one knows what's going to happen in life. So let's just live now.
Meeting new people is hard at the best of times, but Anthony and Kylie's story is proof that you can forge new, loving relationships with dementia. I'm Jim Rogers, and this is Hold the Moment, a podcast from Dementia Australia about life after diagnosis.
And I'm Hamish McDonald. And you're not wrong, Jim. Life is already full of tricky relationship dynamics, not just romantic ones, with friends and with family too. And then when you add dementia into the mix, it can be pretty hard to navigate how things change between you and someone you love. So you're about to hear more of Anthony's story, who found friends and love after his diagnosis, as well as Dom's story, trying to be a great daughter to her dad as well as his carer.
Yeah, it sure is a challenge. I know you've dealt with all of this, Hamish, with your friends. You've got dementia as well as your dad. Are you ever worried about saying the wrong thing or know how to be there for them now?
Nah, not really. Let's go meet Anthony.
My name is Anthony. I'm 67, and I've been diagnosed with young onset dementia, and I have got Alzheimer's version of that.
So tell us a little bit about who was in your life before your diagnosis.
Before my diagnosis, the most people in my life were people I work with. I was in a relationship, which changed after my diagnosis.
When did you first sort of start to notice your symptoms?
Well, I actually didn't start to notice them myself. The person I was in that relationship with was noticing symptoms. So she kept pushing me to get checked, which did lead me to go to my GP, which then led to going to a geriatrician, which led to going to a neuropsychologist, which led to a diagnosis. Even though I was in that relationship, I was still on my own. I lived on my own, and I couldn't go to the hospital to see the doctor because we aren't allowed. So I got a phone call while I was in my unit by myself. And my first reaction was, I just received a death sentence. It just totally shocked me. Well, because my partner was pushing me to see a doctor, the next step was I had to tell her. And it wasn't a warm, supportive reaction.
And she wasn't with you for that diagnosis? You were alone?
I was alone in my unit, yeah. So I felt isolated and very lonely then, and particularly when I didn't get any support.
That's sad. And I believe you've got siblings. How did they handle the news of your diagnosis?
Very well. It's actually caused us to come closer.
Okay.
I've got 2 brothers and a sister, and my next oldest brother, we talk twice a week, every week now, and just to catch up, just to say hello. And we never used to do that. To get the lack of support from the person I was with at the time, and then have a different reaction from my brothers and sister, it was confusing, but the time was confusing anyway, because I didn't know what was going to happen to me. And I didn't know whether in 12 months' time I was going to be not driving, what my future held.
Terrifying.
Yes. Now it's different because I know more, but it was very confronting and confusing because I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't really have any other support where I lived. So my only support was my siblings in another state. And kind of that helped me a lot, the fact that they were supportive, because, I was very lonely and very scared. And, at times, like I said before, you may not want to be here. But through their support and their encouragement, that changed that.
And so your relationship sort of broke down from your diagnosis.
Yes.
How was the dating scene, or what happened?
Well, after that, after a period of time, I was still wanting someone in my life. And I tried the dating apps and met a few people. But I always feel I should be upfront and honest. I would not like to get in a relationship and then 6 months down the track tell that person. So I was always upfront and honest. And I was pretty well 100% every time. They walked away.
And so that must have been so hard for you to find the right person or even tackle that.
It was difficult, but I still felt I needed to stick to my core values and explain that, because it's a very important piece of information. I mean, we all know that you can get into a relationship and who knows what can happen down the track, but this was a pre-diagnosis, so I felt I really had to be honest. And I got to the stage where I just thought, well, this is not going to work. I'll just have to be content that I'll be on my own. But I went to my GP and she said, find some social company, some sport perhaps, try and start that way and to get yourself out of it and talk to more people, which is not normally what I do before diagnosis either. So I said, right, I'll get on the internet and Googled sport for over 60s. And by chance, I came across walking football.
Tell us a little bit about what is walking football? How does it work?
Well, in Australia, it's probably more appropriate to call it walking soccer. And it's just like a small version, safer version of the running game of soccer. Right, firstly, it's 5 or 6 people aside, usually with goalkeepers. And each side will have a different coloured bib, and usually it's a referee. The whistle goes, kick off. It's walking, so they can't run. So they have to pass it. You have opposition will walk up towards you, try and stop you passing. There's no tackling as such. So they have to rely on you make a mistake or you pressuring them to do something with the ball. So therefore, the technical skill is then to know where your other players are and to pass the ball to them. And people walk at different speeds. But It can be very highly competitive and it can be very social. We have all parts of that game, and the ones I played is hardly competitive. We played against a young side. They'd be in their early 20s. They played the running game. We challenged them to a game. They thought, we're going to smash these. Take the running out, take the physical part out, and we smashed them 5-0. So it just proves what the game's like. It levels the field for all abilities.
So was it nerve-wracking when you very first started this walking football and you went to meet new people? Did you feel anxious because of your dementia diagnosis?
I didn't tell them for a while and all. I felt really good with walking football because I felt accepted. And particularly as I became a goalkeeper, and turns out to be a good one. The best moment I ever had on the walking football field was the day that someone gave me the nickname The Wall. It was the day you played for an hour and a half. I never let a goal in. No one got past me. And the person that does our Facebook and that, thinking, what can I write? It's just like a wall. And that's where it came from, The Wall. And I've never had a nickname, not a positive one, particularly growing up where I do. And I just, wow, that's amazing. I've got a nickname. That's awesome. Which made me feel like I was somebody.
Yeah, which is what you want, particularly when you're new to the sport.
Yeah. So I was like first picked, as against like in school when you're last or never picked. And that's really, really helped me a lot to feel that belonging.
Yeah.
And then after a while, once I got to know more people, I went on the committee. And then I told the committee. And then it sort of went from there, told a few other people. And they all accepted it. A lot of them come up and ask questions about it, which I thought was great. And most people said, we wouldn't know you've had it.
So not only has walking football brought new friendships to your life, it's also brought love. You met Kellie through the sport, so how did she react when she found out about your diagnosis?
Well, Kellie's a very special person. And she came back and said, well, the diagnosis doesn't define you as a person. And wanted to get me to know me more, which is just amazing.
Tell me, what did that mean to you for her to react in that way?
Oh, that was so special. That just made me feel so wonderful. And I thought, well, maybe there's a chance. Totally unexpected. I was expecting the same.
Rejection.
Rejection. And the fact that Kellie lived in another state would have made it very easy for her to do that.
So you were originally in Brisbane and Kellie was in Adelaide.
Yes.
So in order to make this work, you had to think, okay, somehow I've got to get this, easier for us to be in touch and see each other.
We'd fly to Melbourne, or I'd fly to Adelaide, or she'd fly to Brisbane. And that's just not sustainable long term. So my lease was coming up. And I thought, well, what do I do? Bugger it. Sorry.
That's okay.
I'll move to Adelaide. I can still do walking football there. I can still do work with Dementia Australia's advocacy. I can do everything in Adelaide I can do in Brisbane.
And now you're based in Adelaide, and the friends that you've got there that you're starting to get to know, the network you start to get to know, how do they come across with the diagnosis that you've talked to them about? Or do they ask you questions? Are they interested? Are they curious? What sort of reaction have you had?
A lot of them don't know.
Really?
At this stage. There's a few that do. No one asks the question. So a lot of people don't know. And that's fine for the moment.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, part of you, in my own experience, part of you doesn't really want to talk about it because, it's a bit of a downer to talk about it, but then part of you sort of wants to acknowledge it. It's a fine line, isn't it, to sort of get it right?
It is. And if people know and they ask, I am more than willing to talk and, educate them about what it's like.
Yep.
And to try and help them understand, because they might have other family relatives that may get a diagnosis or they may get one themselves. And that to me is educational. It's to help them understand. But I only do that if they ask.
Hi, my name's Dom. My dad had vascular dementia. His name's Noel O'Leary, and he was a plumber and a very warm, lovely personality. He had a great sense of humour. And I was his advocate, carer, entertainer, a looker after her, and daughter.
It sounds like you're really close to your dad.
Yeah.
Tell me about him. What kind of guy was he?
Dad used to wear crisp cotton shirts, and they were always like colourful patterns, and he would always iron them beautifully and always be well presented. He was warm, funny. He was pretty much everybody's friend. He was very social. And he loved fishing. He loved telling a joke. So we often read from the dad joke book I brought up on visits to him. Then he worked for himself his whole life. So I found him so inspiring as a kid. I ended up working for myself, just inspired by his ethics and, his working ethic. And so he was my hero, my dad, but he was also probably one of my most favourite people in the world.
When you are that close to someone and you see them receiving that diagnosis, what's it like for you? How did you take all of that?
Obviously, grief and shock straight up. I was already concerned that might be the case, that he may have dementia. But I had to really quickly always feel like I was never looking sad in front of him, always in control, and using humour throughout his illness to make him feel confident that he was being cared for properly, and to make him just not worry and not see that we were worried about him. So it was that false bravado that we put on. I'd often, put on the false face, do a lot of laughing, joking, confident stuff with him, and then I'd have to leave the room sometimes and have a bit of a cry,
Because it's quite hard for children as well to cope with that, as I'm sure you would find, Hamish, with your dad and your siblings.
100%.
It's a bit of a team effort, really, of what's going to happen in the future.
It's scary because you feel like you're making decisions that are possibly quite consequential.
There is definitely role reversal, and you notice that as the first thing. In the very first meeting when I took Dad to the geriatrician with Mum, and we heard the diagnosis, he had a test in the meeting, and pretty much straight up the geriatrician said, you have severe, moderate vascular dementia. And afterwards I talked with him after the meeting and said, how do you feel about this? Have you been worried about your cognitive thinking? Have you been concerned? And he said, yes, I have. And Mum and I told him he's not to worry anymore. We are the ones that are going to take on all his responsibilities in life. He is just to enjoy himself, and we'll be his carers and make sure he lives a happy life.
It's finding a fine line, isn't it, to really just find the right balance?
It is. Luckily, he had that sense of, he loved ridiculous humour, so I could hide behind that a little bit. Whether it was like when I was helping him eat at lunchtimes when he got quite bad, helping him eat food, I would often just break out and play the spoons, just do a random, and that would make him laugh, and then I knew I was connecting with him. Sometimes we'd play music, his favourite music, to enliven him if he was sleeping and not eating.
What kind of music?
He loved Phantom of the Opera, strangely. So we would play that. You know how it starts off,
Yeah.
Everyone else in the wing would be like, oh my goodness, what is this music? It sounds like a funeral.
So, Dom, tell me, how did your mum react to your dad's diagnosis?
So Mum was devastated, of course. Mum and Dad have been together 56 years, so they're a very, very loving couple. Mum went straight into grief. She was grieving the whole time. Dad had dementia, but she was amazing. She managed to be brave and very loving for Dad, and she did some incredible things that I'm really proud of watching her do. She helped Dad keep his sense of self. She when Dad had to go into aged care because she was caring for him at home, and when it became too dangerous for him to stay at home because he was having falls, she made sure that he kept his sense of self by taking all of his shirts home every afternoon and laundering and ironing them exactly how Dad would have done because he was a crazy ironer. And if the laundry took any of Dad's shirts, she would make a beeline down to the laundry in the aged care home and steal the shirts back. So they just looked perfect for Dad. And he was probably the only man in aged care that wasn't in his pajamas, but she really helped him retain his sense of self.
That's amazing. That's so important, as you say, to help keep that person, close to being who they were.
Exactly.
And how about your dad after the diagnosis? Did he do things as well that you recollect maybe protected you guys a little?
I was the one to have to tell Dad he was going into aged care. And I still have a lot of grief thinking about it. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but Dad made it much easier for Mum and I. We had taken him out to coffee that morning, and I had driven him to the aged care home, and I told him in the car that he was having to go just away for a few weeks while Mum needed a lot of rest because she was very tired. And I said to him, "Do you understand?" And he said, yes, I do. And I started getting a bit teary, and he could see that. And I said, "Thanks for understanding. You're amazing, aren't you?" And he said, yes, I am. And I said, "And you're really humble too, aren't you?" And he said, yes, I am.
So everyone's turning up with this kind of fake bravado, trying to make everyone else feel better.
I think
Yeah. And these are the moments when talking about false bravado, suddenly you don't care anymore. You're just there making people happy and yourself, because it is something you can hide behind, laughter and humour, and it's important as well. Just
you've got to hold on to it, haven't you?
You do.
So how do you feel, Jim, about your kids adapting? I mean, you've talked to me in the past about the changing dynamics with your husband, Tyler, but I'm just kind of wondering about the kids as well.
I think with my kids and my kids' partners, I try and be jovial, chat and enjoy a beer with the boys and don't really want to go down that road too much. And I think they respect that in me as well, because I think they avoid saying, "How are you?" And we talk about everything and anything but that.
This is the false bravado that you were talking about, right?
And I think it's really important. It's living a day at a time and celebrating the moment you're in now, which I think is really important with dementia, living in the moment you're in and not, I think that's where anticipatory grief comes in, when you start worrying about what's going to happen.
So, Dom, you did lots of things to try and keep your father-daughter relationship alive, I guess, while he was deteriorating.
Yes.
How did you make that distinction, and how did you help foster that? I
made tools. I knew I would have bad days when he had a bad day, and I would be, how am I going to keep up this happy front? You can't do it all the time. So I thought, I'll make a book for Dad. So I started with a ring binder folder. I started with a few little stories about Dad when he was young, some photos of him growing up. I reached out to his siblings and said, "Do you mind sharing some stories about funny stories?" Because he always had funny stories in his life about growing up together, and they wrote 2 pages of stories. Put them in the book. I started writing stories on our travel. We had some funny things happen when we were traveling overseas together. I put pictures with every story, and each time I visited, I would bring him up a new story. And I thought, this is a great way to give him something to look forward to. I would say, there's going to be another story next week, just wait. And it also helped me if I was having a particularly sad day and I didn't feel it, like I could really cheer him up or I thought I can go to that book and just start reading from it. And it's got the funny stories in it. So it was like a good backup plan for me. And I thought it would be really helpful during COVID when nurses
know about him.
Yeah, and they
look
could
into
read
his life
to
a little.
him about
That is
it.
fantastic.
And visitors, I often notice, not just with our relatives or friends, but Dad had a good friend as well that would visit, and he did say to us, "I'm so nervous. I don't know," because Dad was nonverbal most of the time. "I don't know how to talk to Noel anymore." So I thought, well, this is a great go-to for him as well. He can just either point at the pictures or read some stories. But I did notice in the home in general, people being scared, not knowing how to engage with people with dementia.
Yeah.
So it was a great toolkit for. Yeah.
Well, that can be very confusing for people, right? Because they're used to, like, I get calls all the time now from family or Dad's friends saying, I can't really, like, your dad's not answering the phone. He's not replying to emails. I call him and I can barely hear him. And that's true. He's just losing all of that function.
Yeah.
But I don't really know what I don't know what the solution is. So I end up going to visit him. We go through all his emails and his messages and we reply or do stuff. And then as I'm leaving, I'll call back one of the friends, put it on the loudest speakerphone and put it on Dad's chest and say, off you go.
That's great.
I don't know if it's a very good solution. And Jim, have you noticed any of your friends reacting in different or interesting ways when they learn about your diagnosis?
Yeah, as you said earlier, everybody's different the way they react. Some of my friends are super positive and really look for, well, I do that, I'm forgetful and stuff like that. But some of my friends don't really mention it or discuss it. And I think they get the vibe from me that let's just be positive and carry on. But a couple of my really close friends, have been to awareness about dementia and really invested and read up on it. And spent a lot of time finding out stuff. But some of my mates just are very jovial about it and don't really want to deal with it.
The ones that have invested in figuring things out about it and learning and taking courses or whatever, what's that meant to you?
A lot. Yes, meant a lot because Caroline and Nat, who, went on holiday with Ty and I recently, they both went and did a course and learnt about it. But they're very in touch with a lot of stuff and they're very understanding, and I feel very relaxed because I don't have to put any bravado on, which is exactly what you're chatting about earlier. If they say or do the wrong thing, do you say go back to the course?
Do some homework.
I don't, but I should.
I think the most important thing I'd tell anybody that says, you do hear this often. People say, well, what's the point of visiting people in an aged care home? Because they're often asleep or they've got dementia. They're not going to engage with us. I think an important thing is trying to reach in to your loved ones with dementia by using tools, by reading them stories from their past, by playing games, even if it's, or colouring in, just enjoyable things you can do together. And I think when people say there's no quality of life for someone, even with advanced dementia, I really disagree because to me, I think quality of life is reaching in and connecting with someone you love.
If you're struggling with how your friendships and family relationships have changed since your diagnosis, or if you're the friend who just isn't quite sure what to say, you can call the National Dementia Helpline and talk to an advisor like Kristin. They're here to help.
After a diagnosis of dementia, you might feel like so many things are going to change, and one of the ones you might be really worried about is the changes in your relationship with your partner. If you're worried about how your relationship's going to change, or maybe you've already noticed that it has and you want to talk to somebody about that, Dementia Australia offers support on the helpline or with counselling so that you and your partner can talk about how you're both feeling and talk about ways that you can make things a little better, maybe even a little fun as you go. It can be really difficult when you find out that you've got a diagnosis of dementia and you really want to reach out to the people that you love, your friends and family, but it feels like they're pulling away. I've spoken to a number of friends who call the helpline because they don't know what to say. And often I'll ask them, what do you usually talk to the person about? And maybe it's footy, or maybe it's flowers, or maybe it's a joke that you've always had. And I encourage them to just start there. One thing that might make it easier for your friends is to let them know how they can be with you, how they can make the friendship work easier. So maybe at golf, it's hard for you to write the score. Your friend can do that for you, and you can let them know that. And when you're making new friends, you don't have to tell them right away, I have dementia. It's okay to talk to them about anything else you'd want to talk about. Eventually, it might come up, just like anything else would in conversation. If you want to talk more about anything you've heard on this episode, like navigating new territory in your relationships, you can contact the National Dementia Helpline on 1-800-100-500. We're available 24 hours a day, every day of the year. Give us a call.
Hold the Moment is a podcast from Dementia Australia. It's produced by Deadset Studios. You can find more episodes and resources through the Dementia Australia website, dementia.org.au. And don't forget to follow Hold the Moment in your podcast app so you don't miss an episode. The show is hosted by me, Jim Rogers.
And by me, Hamish McDonald. The executive producers are Kellie Riordan and Grace Pashley. The producer is Liam Riordan, sound design by Sean Holden. A special thanks to the whole team at Dementia Australia and to all the advocates who shared their stories on this podcast.
If you're enjoying Hold the Moment, you can leave us a review or rate us in whatever podcast app you're listening to right now. It really does help other people struggling with dementia find the show. We'd love to hear from you.